Hey, it is great to be back at Grace City. I love coming back to Grace City, not just because of your church, but it gets me back to New Zealand. And I love so many things about New Zealand. One of the things I absolutely love about New Zealand is this shoe company called Allbirds. Anybody else love Allbirds? These are my favorite shoes on the planet. And I love getting to New Zealand because where I live in Brisbane, we don't have Allbirds stores. In fact, I'm not even sure if I can buy them online. So I always get them here so I can support your economy. Another part of the economy that I love to support, last year, when I was here at Grace City for the first time speaking, JD, the day before, he introduced me to this little secret called Waiheke Island. And guess what? I go every time I'm in New Zealand now. I carve out at least a day to get to Waiheke Island because it is gorgeous. And so I was here at Mother's Day this year, and I took my beautiful wife, Kristen, there for the first time. Kristen's with me this morning. I'm not going to point her out in the audience because she will kill me after the service if I do that, all right? But we took some of our closest friends from the UK, Duncan and his wife Debbie there yesterday. We got to spend the day there. And Duncan is actually speaking over at Grace City East today. And I'm excited to hear the reports of what Duncan was able to share with them after the service today. I'm super pumped about that. I want to go off script this morning slightly. And that always makes the people up the back in the production booth very nervous, okay? But here's the deal. Some of you, Ming and Mel just told us about this thing that's happening, Grace City at Christmas. Some of you are still sitting on it. It's still glued to your butt. So here's what I'd love for you to do. If it is still something you're sitting on, pull it out. And here's the reason why. A few years ago, I was sitting in a church service in Colorado Springs, a church that I was a part of at the time. And it was right before Easter. And I was watching up on the screens, like you can see up there, the back of my balding head. I was watching a story of a lady named Shauna. And Shauna was telling the story of her journey of faith. And remember, this is just before Easter, okay? And she was talking about a conversation she and her sister had just before Christmas, so about 4 or 5 months before that. And they got into an argument. Shauna and her sister got into an argument. And as they were trying to figure out who was right in this argument, Shauna's sister said to her, okay, enough's enough, I'm going to Google it. But before I Google the answer to this question, because her sister thought she was right, she said to her, if I'm right and you're wrong, then you lose this bet and you have to come with me to church on Christmas Eve. That was what she had to do if she lost the bet. Well, fast forward a couple of weeks, she lost the bet, by the way. Shauna goes to church on Christmas Eve. Her perspective of church was kind of like what you might refer to as kind of your grandma's version of church, like maybe some odd smells, really cold and hard wooden seats. Some of you are nodding because you're like, yeah, that's the kind of church my grandmother went to. Not like Grace City where we have these really nice cushioned, comfortable chairs in the service. She came to church. Her perception of church was completely changed that day. So much so that she decided to come back after Christmas. And she started coming back because somebody then invited her to go and check out a thing like Alpha. So for all of the church people in the room, you know what Alpha is. If you're brand new to the whole church scene or you're watching online or somehow you stumbled across the service today, Alpha's basically like Christianity 101. It's a half a dozen weeks or so where you can come and learn answers about questions you might have about Christianity. And so Shauna comes to that. Not only is her perspective of church completely changed, now her perspective of Jesus and his desire to have a relationship with her is completely changed. And she's telling her story on a video. And that day, she actually got baptized and went public with her faith in Jesus, all because she lost a bet with her sister right before Christmas. So here's the moral of the story. Some of you have just pulled out this card, and I double dog dare you to bet one of your friends or family members some sort of wacky bet and invite them to come and enjoy Christmas here at Grace City. You have no idea what losing a bet might do to change the trajectory of someone's life. You have no idea. So I want to encourage you to do that. And by the way, that has nothing to do with what we're going to talk about today. So do me a favor. I would love it if you would kind of just bear with me. I'm a former PE teacher by profession, so I spent 4 years learning how to blow a whistle, and I'm very good at blowing whistles. So I love playing games, and I'd love to play a game with you guys this morning to kick things off. So if you're able to, Would you mind standing with me? And if you're watching online, I want to invite you to stand too. In that cafe where you're watching from, it's going to be very awkward to be watching a screen now and standing in a cafe, but play along, it'll be fun. The name of this game is called Face Off. And I've actually played it here before at Grace City, once before, but not this version of the game, okay? Face Off is a simple game where I put up on the screen 2 images, and this category of this particular edition of the game is accessibility and exclusivity, okay? And so I'm gonna give you 2 images, and I want you to decide which one you think is the least accessible or the most exclusive, okay? So we're gonna have a practice round, okay? We're gonna do this first round. I'm gonna put up 2 images of restaurants up on the screen, okay? So this direction, we have the Bank Tavern in Bristol, England. And in this direction, we have, I can't pronounce it, but it's somewhere in upstate New York, okay? If you think the tavern in Bristol is more exclusive and more difficult to get into than this place in New York, you're gonna face this direction. If you think the restaurant in New York is more difficult to get into and more exclusive, then you're gonna face this direction. If you're still facing me, when I count down from 3, you will be eliminated from the game, okay? This is not a game for every generation. There are some generations that think everyone should be able to get a trophy at the end of the game. This is not that kind of game, okay? All right, now before you start laughing, you might be a part of that generation. Don't be thinking it's some other generation, okay? All right, here's how we do it. We're gonna give you a countdown from 3, and then we'll reveal the answer. If you're still facing me, you'll be out. You ready? 3, go ahead and make a decision. You gotta face that way or this way. 2, some of you are still facing me. It's about to get really hard for you, all right? 1, and the answer is the tavern in Bristol, England, all right? So if you were facing New York, you would be out of the game typically, okay? Now, quick little tidbit of information. This tavern in Bristol, England has a 4-year waiting list to get into the restaurant. You have to wait 4 years. Talk about planning ahead. Husbands, we're out of it. There's no way we can think 4 years ahead, that's for sure. All right, good news for everybody that was just eliminated. That was a practice round, that was a grace round. You're still in the game, you can stand up. But unlike the grace of Jesus, it ends here, okay? And you won't have any more moving forward, all right? Next 2 pictures. When it comes to working out in a gymnasium or at some sort of workout gym place, there are some exclusive gyms around the world. These are the top 2 in the world. If you think that the one in Zambia is more exclusive and harder to get into, then you're gonna face that direction. If you think it's the one in London, you're gonna face this direction, and you have 3 seconds to decide. If you're facing me, you'll be out, and you won't be standing back up in this game, all right? Here we go, 3, 2, 1, and the answer is Zambia, all right? So everyone that was facing towards London, you are out of the game. You are eliminated. And if you are still facing the front and still bewildered by the whole game, go ahead and take a seat if you haven't picked up this far, okay? All right, next 2 pictures. Next 2 pictures. Most exclusive community to live in. You know, those gated communities, very difficult to get into. If you think it is the Royal Palm Yacht Club and Country Club in the US, you're gonna face this direction. If you think it is Alphaville in Brazil, you are going to face that direction. You have 3 seconds to decide. Again, ready? 3, 2, 1, and the answer is the Royal Yacht Club. All the Brazilians in the room were hoping it was them. They were hoping. Now, at this point in the game, some of you are wondering, why are we even playing this game in church? That's a great question. And you may be wondering, what prize do you get if you win the game? Good news is, the prize you get is the knowledge of knowing that you won the game. It's an incredible prize. You get to walk out of here with incredible confidence, knowing I won the game at church. All right, next 2 questions. When it comes to exclusive shopping around the world, there is one country that has the top 2 most exclusive shopping centers in all of the world, all right? It's in the same country, but there are 2 of them. One of them is more exclusive than the other. If you think it is the Dubai Mall, you're gonna face that direction. If you think it is the Mall of the Emirates, you're gonna face this direction, but you have to decide in 3 seconds. You ready? 3, 2, this gentleman over here is still facing the front. 1, And the answer is the Dubai Mall. The Dubai Mall is the correct answer. All right. Got quite a few over here that are still in the game. Several over here are still in the game. All right, the next two pictures of two different racquetball sports. Now, this is going to confuse some of you, okay? But we're going to flip the question on its head. We're not looking for which one is the most exclusive and the hardest to access. We're asking the question, which of these two racquetball sports is the easiest to access, okay? It's the most accessible to learn how to play and to get into the game, okay? So if you think ping pong is the most accessible, you'll face this direction. If you think badminton is the most accessible, you'll face this direction, all right? But you have to make a decision, all right? Someone up the back there still indecisive. Jonathan, I think you gotta make a call, okay? You gotta make a call. All right, in 3, 2, 1, the answer is you are all eliminated from the game. Nobody gets to walk out of here saying, I won the game today. How disappointing. You wish you came to church filled with hope, and you could leave filled with hope, but now you're walking away disappointed. The good news is, I'm about to tell you what's the most accessible racquetball sport in the planet, and it is called pickleball. Pickleball, yeah, we got some pickleball fans in the audience over here. We got some people down the front. Pickleball is the most accessible racquetball sport on the planet. So much so that it is also the fastest growing sport in the world right now. And us people from Queensland are going to be celebrating the Olympics in 2032. We are working hard to make it a medal sport in 2032. Somebody's chuckling over there. No, we're dead serious about this, folks. This is how serious and passionate we are about pickleball. Now, before we move on, because pickleball is not the point of today's talk, before we move on, I'd like to do something that might be a bit of a stretch for us this morning, but I think it would be helpful. I'd like you to turn to your neighbor or maybe somebody close by you, and I want you to tell them, I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to do this, tell them the hardest thing you have tried to get into, something that was exclusive that you tried to get into. It might have been, maybe it was a sporting club that you wanted to get into. Maybe there's some golfers in the room that always wish they could become a member of a certain club and they've tried to get in there. What is the most difficult or challenging thing you have tried to get into? And I want you to share that with your neighbor right now. All right? Take a couple of minutes to do that. If you're watching online, everyone in the room is chatting about it right now. We want to invite you to chat with us about that right now. So jump into the chat. Mel is going to be there, and she would love to hear what was the most difficult thing for you to get into. Tell us in the chat right now. We'd love to hear from you. All right, if one person has been kind of hogging the conversation, let the other person tell you now what was the most challenging thing for you to get into. All right, and keep telling us in the chat if you're watching online, what was a challenging thing for you to get into as well. All right, I'm going to put up on the screen some areas in your life or in your world that might be places for you that are challenging, all right? Maybe it was a cricket team you were trying to get into, or a sewing club. There was a bunch of really good sewers, and they were like, you can't come in our club. You're not good enough. You're sewing. Your needlework's not quite there yet. Or maybe it was some sort of work-related group. You really wanted to work in a particular group at work, but you couldn't get into that group for some reason because it was just somewhat exclusive, and the people already in that club or in that group didn't make it easy for people to get into that group. Here's what we're going to do this morning. We're going to have a bit of a family chat, okay? A bit of a family talk. Sometimes when my wife and I run into a challenge as a family, we'll call the kids together and we'll sit down around the table and we'll say, hey, there's something we need to work on as a family. And today is kind of one of those conversations. So here's what I want to invite you to do. If you're not a church person, you say, hey, this is not my gig normally. I'm just here because somebody told me there are some cute guys or some cute girls that go to this church and you should come and meet one of them. I don't know how you landed here or how you stumbled across watching it online. We're going to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit today and have a family conversation about church. But even if you're not a church person, I think you're going to find this fascinating. In fact, I think you're going to walk out of here thinking to yourself, I wish more churches talked about this. I think that may be your response to our conversation today. Here's what I've discovered, and it came through my experience with pickleball, actually. About 4 years ago, I moved from the United States back to Australia, and I moved to Brisbane, and I had fallen in love with pickleball living over in Colorado, and I wanted to play pickleball when I got back to Australia. So here's what I did. I looked up online where there were pickleball clubs in my area, and I had to drive a minimum of 45 minutes, sometimes an hour, to find a place to play pickleball. And after my wife finally said, hey, enough is enough, you're out of the house too much, you need to find somewhere closer to home, I decided to invite a few of my friends to a local tennis court. I taped out the lines for pickleball, and I introduced them to the game of pickleball. Now, much to my amazement, they fell in love with pickleball as much as I did. In fact, some of them even more so. And so they said, let's do this every single week. So every Tuesday, we would get together and we would play pickleball. And they started telling their friends about it. And all of a sudden, about a year or so later, we had over 150 members in a pickleball club on the north side of Brisbane. But here's what I noticed very quickly. These friends that I first introduced the game to, they started getting really, really good at pickleball. And when we first started the club, we said, hey, the goal of the club is to introduce as many people in our area as possible to the game of pickleball. But within less than a year, I started hearing conversations around our club that went a little bit like this. You know, some of the new people aren't as good at pickleball as we are, and I think we should start another night of the week for all of the people that have been in the club a long time who know how to play pickleball, and we'll just play really competitively, and we won't invite those new people to that night of the week. Here's what I've discovered. I've discovered this truth. The gravitational pull of every organization is always, over time, towards people that are already in the club. Whether it's pickleball or cricket or sewing or something at your work, the gravitational pull of every organization tends to be towards insiders, people that are already in the club. Now, I mentioned just a moment ago, this is kind of a family conversation for those people that are part of the church. And so if you don't call yourself a Christian, or you'd say, hey, I'm kind of on the journey, I'm still asking questions about faith, you can kind of check out of the conversation for just a moment, all right? If you're watching online, this would be a great time to grab a cup of tea or coffee, because I want to just chat for a moment with just us church folks. Not only is the gravitational pull of every organization towards insiders, here's the reality. The gravitational pull of every church is towards insiders as well. Over time, we tend to be a club that is really designed for people that are already in the club. But that's not how the church began. In fact, the church began just about 50 days after Jesus was crucified and he was buried and he rose again from the dead, which, by the way, side note, if you're on your journey of faith, you're still checking out Christianity, that rising again from the dead part of the Jesus story, that was the hurdle for me coming to faith in Jesus. I had to do a lot of research on, did Jesus really rise again from the dead? Because that was the primary hurdle for me. So if that's a hurdle for you, I understand, I get it. And I would encourage you to explore that question. Did Jesus really rise again from the dead? But about 50 days after he came back from the dead, the church began on a Sunday that many of us would refer to in the church world as the Pentecost Sunday. This is when the whole thing kind of took off. In fact, we read the story of this particular Sunday, and over 3,000 people joined the church, joined the club on that particular day. And then it was several years later, but not much later, that the gravitational pull towards insiders started to impact the church. Because every organization, including the church, has this gravitational pull towards people that are already inside the club. And the church is no different. And it's been a struggle that the church has had for centuries. From the very beginning, this has been a challenge. I want us to take a look at where this gravitational pull was first addressed in the first century in a book called the Book of Acts, which is in the second part of the Bible, the New Testament. And we actually see this issue of the gravitational pull addressed in the story at the beginning of the church. I'm convinced that the solution that they found in the first century will be a helpful solution for us in 2023 as well with this issue of the gravitational pull. So here's how the story began. In Acts chapter 15, it says certain people came down from Judea to Antioch and were teaching the believers, that's people that are already in the club, that unless you are circumcised according to the custom taught by Moses, you cannot be saved. Now, before we just breeze past this verse, some of you have no idea what this circumcised according to the custom taught by Moses is all about. And I'm not going to go into detail because that would be scary in a church service. But suffice to say, this is what they were saying. Unless somebody has a medical procedure according to Jewish tradition, specifically the men, then you can't be a part of the club. At which every guy on the planet says, I don't need to play pickleball. All of the women are like, hey, I don't mind being in church, and I don't mind being a part of the club. But every bloke is like, you know what? If it takes a medical procedure in a small little van in the car park before you come into church, I'm out. But that's what these people were saying to the people that were in the club. They were saying, in order to be a part of the church club, in order for you to participate, then you have to go through this medical procedure, which was not so small, in order for you to be in the club. Now the story continues. It says, this brought Paul and Barnabas into sharp dispute and debate with them. I love the way we kind of have softened everything in the Bible. When was the last time you had a sharp dispute and an argument with someone? I don't remember ever describing an argument over a medical procedure as a sharp dispute. I think they were almost in a fist fight, saying, we're not doing this. We're not requiring this. They brought them into sharp dispute and a major argument brought out. And it says that Paul and Barnabas were then appointed, along with some other believers, others that were in the club, to go up to Jerusalem to see the apostles and elders about this issue. Now, in Jerusalem, that's where the church started. Remember, I talked about the day of Pentecost where 3,000 people were added to the club on that first day of the church? That's where it happened in Jerusalem. It was still the epicenter of all of church leadership at the time. And so this group of people in Antioch, in fact, we'll bring up a map on the screen. Notice at the top of the screen, Antioch is up there. You see the Mediterranean Sea, then all the way down the bottom, you see Jerusalem. And so they commissioned Paul and Barnabas and some other people that were in the club to head down to Jerusalem to meet with the church leaders to resolve this issue. The story continues. It goes on to say this. The church sent them on their way, and as they traveled through Phoenicia and Samaria, they told how the Gentiles had been converted, how so many people that were outside the Jewish faith were now following Jesus. This news made all the believers very glad along the way. Now let's go back to the map. You'll notice they started in Antioch at the top. Notice there along the Mediterranean Sea, Phoenicia next to Damascus, they traveled through there. They went through Samaria. They're telling the story about all these non-Jewish people joining the church, coming into the club of following Jesus, and everyone that heard them was thrilled that they were adding people to the church. The story continues. It says, when they came to Jerusalem, they were welcomed by the church and the apostles and elders, to whom they reported everything God had done through them. Listen to their response. It goes on to say, then some of the believers who belonged to the party of the Pharisees stood up and said, the Gentiles must be circumcised and required to keep the law of Moses. Now, this group of people that responded, this group of people that were part of the party of the Pharisees, this is the same group of people, if we back up, the same group of people that put Jesus on the cross and crucified him. And now they're saying to the People that are just joining the church, just joining the club, you've got to go out to the van in the parking lot, have the medical procedure before you can come in and be a part of the club. Remember, Paul and Barnabas, they didn't want to have any of this. So the story continues. The apostles and elders met to consider this question. After much discussion, Peter got up and addressed them. Now, small little detail. Remember the Sunday, Pentecost Sunday, where 3,000 people jumped into the church and became part of the club? Peter was the guy that was preaching on that Sunday. So he's got great respect in the church. He's a leader in the church. And he responds and addresses them, and here's what Peter says. Brothers, you know that some time ago God made a choice among you that Gentiles might hear from my lips the message of the gospel and believe. What's this message of the gospel that Peter's talking about? He goes on to explain. He says this, God who knows the heart showed that he accepted them by giving them the Holy Spirit to them, just as he did to us. I love this. Peter says God did not discriminate between us and them, for he purified their hearts by faith. This is what Peter's saying. The same presence of God that we received when we said yes to Jesus and followed him, what we call in the church the Holy Spirit, the same presence of God that we received when we said yes to Jesus, these people have received that same presence when they began following Jesus. God has not discriminated between us and them. Everyone is welcome in the club. And then it goes on to say, now then, why do you try to test God by putting on the necks of Gentiles a yoke that neither we nor our ancestors have been able to bear? I don't want to step on any toes this morning, but let's be honest. Sometimes as church people, we can put expectations on people that are outside the faith and outside the church that we can't even live up to, that our grandparents couldn't live up to. And yet we put those same standards and expectations on people who haven't even signed up to follow Jesus yet. That's what Peter's saying. Why are we testing God? Why are we putting the same standards and expectations that we can't even live up to onto these Gentiles that are turning towards God? The story continues. It says, no, we believe it is through the grace of our Lord Jesus that we are saved just as they are. If you are still kind of exploring faith, you're on your journey of discovering who Jesus is, this right here, what Peter just said, this is the whole story of Jesus in a nutshell. It doesn't matter what you've done or what you haven't done. It doesn't matter whether your life is all cleaned up and you've got it all together, or you would say, my list of things that I need to get right is a mile long. It's all by the grace of Jesus that we are accepted into God's family. Full stop. Nothing we can do, nothing we can't do. It's all by his grace that we are accepted into his family. Peter clarifies what the gospel is all about. It's by the grace of Jesus that we are welcomed into God's family. The story continues. It says, the whole assembly became silent as they listened to Barnabas and Paul telling about the signs and wonders God had done among the Gentiles through them. When they finished, James spoke up. Now, before we listen to what James says, this is important for you to understand. James is not just some random guy in the first ever church business meeting. He's a leader in the church, and here's another little thing that you may not be aware of. James was the brother of Jesus. So if anyone in the room who really is qualified to talk about what Jesus expects of people, what should let them in the club, what doesn't let them in the club, James is an authority that people want to listen to. James says this, brothers, listen to me, he says. It is my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. This week, I just read a brand new report from a survey that went out all across New Zealand. I love this report. You may not be aware of this, but every 5 years or so, They do a survey on faith and belief in New Zealand and what people think about it all across the country. In this particular survey that just came out this year, in fact, this week in 2023, it says that 81% of New Zealanders are open to having a spiritual conversation. In fact, they're curious about spiritual things. You know what James would say if he was here today? James would say this: "It is my judgment, therefore, that we don't make it difficult for the 81% of New Zealanders who are turning towards spiritual things, that are interested in having a spiritual conversation. We shouldn't make it difficult for the 81% of New Zealanders that are interested in learning about what God wants for their life." James says, let's not make it difficult for those that are turning to God. So let me ask you a question this morning. In fact, this is a question that I want us to kind of wrestle with today as we land the plane in this conversation. How is the church making it difficult for those that are turning to God? Even if you're not a church person, even if you're still exploring your faith, I think this is a question that all of us can answer. What are some ways that the church sometimes make it difficult for those that are turning to God? Now, earlier on, I asked you to turn to your neighbor and say, hey, here's a place in my life where I found it difficult to get into a club. I want to invite you to do the same thing with this question. And I know for some of you, this might be a bit of a stretch. Am I allowed to talk badly about the church in church? The answer is yes, because we've got to have an honest conversation. How is it that how does the church sometimes inadvertently make it difficult for those that are turning to God? And by the way, if you're on your faith journey, you probably would have a lot that we could learn as a church from the answer to this question. So go ahead, turn to your neighbor and answer that question. And go ahead and start right now. For those of you that are watching online, I'd love it if you drop in the chat maybe something that you think the church is doing that makes it difficult for those that are turning to God. And Mel would love to respond to you this morning. Go ahead and talk amongst yourselves here in the auditorium. All right, if I can have your attention again. Thank you for participating. It looks like some robust conversations happening out there. And for those of you that are watching online, thanks for dropping in the chat how you sometimes see the church making it difficult for people that are turning to God. I mentioned before that I'm a PE teacher by profession. I'm a sports fanatic. I love watching the Olympic Games. One of my favorite events at the Olympics to watch is the event of hurdles. And sometimes the hurdles are difficult for people. You can see up on the screen, it was difficult for some of these guys as they were coming down the track. And I think sometimes as a church, we can accidentally or inadvertently put up hurdles for people that are trying to turn to God. But one of the things I've discovered on a personal level is this: it's really easy for me to point the finger at the church and say, here's how the church is making it difficult for those that are turning to God. What's not so easy for me is to turn the attention to myself and ask the question, how am I perhaps creating hurdles for those that are turning to God? Because the truth of the matter is this: the church is made up of people. It's the people in the church that sometimes we accidentally or inadvertently create hurdles for those that are turning to God. Now, it would be a real stretch. I've already stretched you enough this morning, asking you to turn and talk to your neighbor. It would be a real stretch for me to ask you to answer this next question with your neighbor, so I'm not going to ask you to do that. But I'd love for you to pull out your phone and maybe to go to the message app or the notes app, go ahead and do that now. Pull out your phone and create a new note or a new message to yourself. And I want you to answer this question: am I creating hurdles for those turning to God? What are the hurdles that maybe I'm creating for those that are turning to God? As you're thinking about that question and maybe just writing a note to yourself or messaging yourself, here's what I discovered. That same report that said that 81% of New Zealanders are open to spiritual things and spiritual conversations. Here's one of the other things the report said. This is mind-blowing to me. It said that 2 out of 3 New Zealanders, 66% of all New Zealanders said that it's the authentic, genuine faith of a follower of Jesus that would encourage them to explore their faith. Listen to that. 66% of New Zealanders said it was the authentic, genuine faith of a follower of Jesus that would be a catalyst to them exploring faith. So it has less to do with the church, is what this report is saying, and it has more to do with us as individuals and our authentic, genuine faith being a catalyst for those turning to Jesus. I want to encourage you with a simple story as we wrap up our conversation today that I became aware of actually in July of this year. I was visiting a church in our network of churches. We have a network of churches that Grace City is a part of. It's called the Irresistible Church Network, and we're trying to create churches all over Australia, New Zealand, and Asia that even people that don't normally go to church would love to engage with. And I was in one of our network churches in Adelaide in July of this year, and they invited a lady to come up onto the stage. This lady's name is Kristen. It was her 63rd birthday that Sunday. And she came up onto the stage and she started telling her story of how she started following Jesus. She explained that during COVID, she had fallen into a deep, dark depression. In fact, so much so that she had become suicidal, and her husband literally had to drag her to get her some help, some medical help. She began to get some help, and she began to make some steps towards getting healthy. And on that journey of getting healthy with her mental health, she met a police officer in her community, a guy named Simon. And Simon started journeying with Kristen through her mental health journey as she was starting to get well. And eventually Simon said to her, you know, I go to this thing every Sunday morning. It's a church here in the community, and I think you would love the people at the church. And so finally Kristen said yes, and she came to church. And she discovered, in her words, she said it this way, she said, I discovered a loving community of people who were willing for me to ask any question about faith. Quote, a loving community of people who were willing for me to ask any question about faith. And so over a number of months, she began to ask questions about faith. And eventually she put her faith in Jesus. And on her 63rd birthday, happened to be the Sunday I was visiting, she got baptized in a little tank outside the church in the middle of winter in the freezing cold. They had heated up the water, fortunately. But she went public with her faith. All because somebody invited her to come and check out a church that was a loving community who were willing for her to ask any question about her faith. The reports say that New Zealand is no different. 81% of people are actually turning towards God. More than 66% of people are looking at the active, authentic, genuine faith of Christians as a catalyst for them to begin their faith journey. And so God invites us to be that beacon of hope, to be that one that invites people to consider turning towards Jesus and to remove every hurdle possible. I'm convinced of this. Auckland needs a church that is willing to remove every hurdle for people that are turning to God. And I know that Grace City desires to be that kind of church. Would you do me a favor? Would you stand? The band is going to lead us in a song here in just a moment. If you're able to stand and sing along with us, we'd love to invite you to do that. I want you to look out for the words in the song that I'm about to read. Pay attention as we sing the song and look for these lyrics. It says this about halfway through the song. It says, Lord, will you heal our land? I love this. That every eye will see, that every heart will know the one who took our sin, the one who died and rose. And when your kingdom comes, and when at last you call, we'll rise to worship you alone. Breathe on your church, pour out your presence. Would you pray with me? God, we desire to see every heart in New Zealand come to know who you are. We desire that every eye would see the person of Jesus and your love for them. God, we understand that many people, over 80% of people in New Zealand, are turning towards you. Help us to be a church and a people that remove all the hurdles for people that are turning to you, that they might come to know the love of Jesus. May our authentic, genuine faith, as we live it out in our daily lives, be the catalyst for people that are turning to you to discover the love of Jesus. I pray this in Jesus' precious name. Amen.